Hey everybody, grab your Bible, a pencil, and a journal, and maybe even a cup of coffee, and join in on our conversation. But first, I would like for you to write this down. 1 Kings chapter 19, verses 9 and 10. And he came there to a cave and lodged there. And behold, the word of the Lord came to him, and he said to him, What are you doing here, Elijah? And he said, I have been very zealous for the Lord, the God of hosts, for the sons of Israel have forsaken thy covenant, torn down thy altars, and killed the prophets with the sword. And I alone am left, and they seek my life to take it away.
Hey everyone, welcome to Write This Down with Dot Bowen. My name is Cara. I am Dot's daughter, and every week we sit down together and we talk through truth and scripture. And I just want to say before we jump into this conversation that your support and listening to us each week means so much. So we would love it if you would leave a review on YouTube or whatever podcast platform that you may listen on. When you like, subscribe, and leave a review, it helps this show be found by other women who want to know and follow Jesus. So we are continuing to talk about people in the Bible, and we are talking about Elijah in this episode. And I really loved this conversation. I mean, you know, in the other episodes, how much I love Moses and David, but I don't know, this conversation was I really enjoyed it. And it was just good for me personally to just kind of talk through some of the truths that we can see in Elijah's life and how that can apply to our own lives. But I also want to say really quickly as well, at the end of this episode, we talk about a book that my mom and I both love. And as always, we would love to hear from you. So if you have any questions about the book or the practice that I mentioned at the end of the episode, we would love to know. Or if you have any questions ever, please reach out to us either through social media, or you can write us an email at hello@dotbowen.com, which you can find that information in the description of every episode. So all that to say, we are so glad that you're here, and we would love for you to pull up a chair and join in our conversation.
Hey, Cara, here we are. Conversation.
That's interesting. I don't usually walk into conversation saying conversation, but
Hey, everybody. Conversation right here.
I'm excited about talking about Elijah. A little fun fact for everyone, which if they haven't noticed, we're obviously talking about people in the Bible the last couple weeks, and we'll continue for the next few, but I chose all of the people we're talking about.
Well, aren't you something?
Which I don't know why, but so I'm going to be excited about all these people, basically, I guess is what I'm saying.
I guess that's what you're saying, yeah.
I know we talked about Moses and David and Abraham, which are all people that I love. But actually, that's not true. There's some that come up that I don't feel as I don't dislike anyone that we're talking about, but there's some that we will talk about in a few weeks or a couple weeks maybe that I'm not as oh, I love them. But anyway, I mean, I like Elijah's story is what I'm getting at.
That's right. And the only reason that we're talking about these people is because they're in the Bible, and they are great lessons. These are great examples. Their lives, their stories, the circumstances around their lives, and the things that are going on in their lives, in the way that they trust God, in the way that they have a problem with God, the way that they sometimes question God, the way that they turn back to God. So all of these things are people like me and you, and the fact that we can see their relationship with God and who they are and how they respond in their spiritual journey. We may not be the who's who in the Bible and these great spiritual giants, but we all have a relationship with God. And
well, they're just like us, basically. I do think we can tend to, I mean, maybe it's not just the Bible, but a lot of times if we're reading stories about people, but in particular the Bible, they can kind of seem like characters in a story versus people in a story. I don't know if that makes sense. They're a little different
they're not
to me,
real.
But they're just characters, and kind of wow, I wish I could. Which that is one of the verses I really love. That's in the New Testament. I think it's in James, and he's talking about prayer, and he's like, Elijah was a righteous man just like us. And I didn't even think about that until just now. But since we're talking about Elijah, but it's really that. It's like these men and these women who are in the Bible have these amazing stories of what God did, but God doesn't choose, he's not just only going to do amazing things in their lives. He's going to do amazing things in our lives too, if we let him, and if we look at, these people. And anyway, so I think that's cool to kind of be okay, let's put ourselves in their shoes and see what they did, what not to do, or,
Right. And in reality, Elijah, the context of Elijah and how evil the place where he lived, that moment of time, that era of, in the lives of the Israelite people was very dark. And Ahab was a very evil king. And matter of
and
fact,
Jezebel. Yeah.
yeah, and they say that Bible scholars actually describe him as being addicted to evil. So here is Elijah coming on the scene that God's called him. And anyway, as we get into his story and see about, when God begins to work through the lives of Elijah and calls him to go and take a stand for the evil that the Israelites were doing, and how they were so like, the people around them.
Yeah, well, they were worshiping other gods.
Yes.
I think that's in chapter 18. Is that when? And the prophets of Baal, I guess the gods of the time were Baal or something like that. Yeah, anyway, but yeah, it's evil. That's basically, it's dark. It's dark and evil.
Very, very dark. Yes. Yes. Yeah. And Ahab was, it says in 1 Kings 14:9 that Ahab was one of the worst kings ever. And so I think that, we can really learn from Elijah in the fact of we are living in times right now that are very dark. We're living in times where I believe that a lot of people live as if God doesn't exist. And that was exactly what was happening, in the time of Elijah, because they weren't really worshiping the one and true God. The Israelites were not. And they were in the midst of all of these people that were trusting in gods that were really are not gods. And Elijah brings them to the point. He's like, you think your God is good? It was that moment when he, really took a stand and to put him to the test and said, okay, let's decide whose God is really real God. And, we just see Elijah do so many amazing things, and we see God just work in Elijah's life in a tremendous way. And we see that Elijah just sees God's hand with miracle, miracle, miracle. And one of the reasons, Cara, that I picked that verse is that now we see Elijah struggles. It says he's at this cave and he's running from Jezebel. And so he's scared.
Yeah, well, and I think some quick context with that part that you read was Elijah did challenge the God, quote unquote, gods of Baal and said, and that was something that God led him to do, and basically said, if this thing does not go on fire, then there's a God, not a God. Anyway, come to find out, God lit the thing on fire, showed everyone that he is the one true God. So it was like this amazing moment. I don't know the time between when that happened and when, like, I don't know if it was the next day, the next week, the next year. I don't know if you know that, and maybe it doesn't matter. But basically there's this big moment where Elijah shows the people who the one true God is, like you're saying, was at this dark time. And then Jezebel and Ahab, which Jezebel is Ahab's wife, Queen Jezebel, I guess. She basically, they hate Elijah, obviously. They're dark and evil, so they hate anyone, man of God. Yeah, righteousness. So Jezebel basically threatens Elijah's life and he runs, which I think is so interesting because you would think, like, I've seen God, but it also, I think it kind of makes sense a little bit though, in some ways, because thinking of the time being so dark and evil, I think that also can show how when you are surrounded by oppression, by dark and evilness, like, it is so easy to forget the light. It's so easy to kind of get wrapped up in it, like.
I think what you're saying, because this is one of the points that really spoke to me, is that Elijah saw God just do miracle after miracle, and he stood up to Ahab. He stood up and said, let's just test the gods. And that was a huge moment because Jezebel, they were Baal worshipers. So that's what made Jezebel so mad. And that's why you're saying, like, she's now like, I'm going to come after you. I'm going to kill you. And he hears Jezebel say, those things, and he gets afraid and he runs. And we see God, he has seen God do miracle after miracle. He's seen God rescued him. He'd seen God just do all these things. But now he's listening to, like you said, this oppression and these words. Don't, underestimate the power of words. And this fear comes on. And now all of a sudden, Elijah's forgotten at that moment. I don't think he's forgotten, but he's definitely responding to not trusting in the God that I know, but I'm listening to the words of Jezebel, and I'm feeling this oppression. And now I'm responding and acting. My actions are based on what I'm looking at, what I'm hearing, and what I'm focusing on. And I think that's a huge lesson for us, because we can see God do miracle after miracle, but if we're not protective in our minds and we're not, protective in what we're looking at, we'll run into a cave. And we see that Elijah, goes into this cave and he's hiding from Jezebel. Now, he had 400 Baal worshipers right around him that would have killed him, but now all of a sudden he's in this cave and scared. And I think what you're saying is so easily we forget sometimes when we're surrounded by darkness about the light and the truth of who God is and how he rescues us.
And I think too, like his fear was legitimate. They were evil. They were evil people. And I would think she probably would take his life, if it wasn't for, the sovereignty of God. And I think that's hard too, it would be so easy to be like, man, Elijah, why'd you just run? But also, I guess it's like, I see both, I'm like looking at both sides of it, where it's like, if he's clearly just listening to the words of Jezebel, which are, the words of oppression and darkness, and he's not focusing on the Lord and not focusing on, okay, if God will protect me, he's protected me so far. I know, remembering his call, all that kind of stuff. But then also at the same time, I'm like, I don't blame the guy, because I guess what I'm getting at is like, there's a very real fear in the world. Like there's a very real, things can happen. People can, bad stuff happens.
Hurt you,
But it goes back to what he's focusing on. So it's like both. It's like what you're saying.
He could have been killed a long time ago. I mean, this was not his first time in his life.
Yeah.
I think if we see the progression of his life, and when we see in Scripture where God's like, and I tell you, when I was studying this, Cara, and I did a retreat years and years after it, when I read the words, when God said to Elijah, and I read these words, "What are you doing here?" I thought, oh my gosh.
When he's under the tree.
Yeah, it's like, oh my gosh, like, what do you, God was like, why are you running? Like, if I wanted you dead, if these people had the power over you, you've been dead a long time ago. And so as I kind of looked in these scriptures and started really reading his journey, you see that he gets a little prideful. He's like, I have stood up for you. God, I'm on your side here. Like, God, look, I have been a great Christian. Like, I go to church every day. I feed the poor and all this. Like,
even with like the whole Baal, like when the fire and that big moment happens, Elijah is a little like he mocks them basically.
Yeah.
Like there is, I guess you can
my God
see a
is
little
better
bit
than
of
your God.
Yeah, basically. Like it's like, it is kind of interesting.
But take heed lest we fall. And that's the key. Like, how do you get into these moments when you're really trusting God and you're really dependent upon God, and then you hear a word, or maybe you look at Instagram, or maybe you look at some people's post on one of the social medias, and all of a sudden your focus is on that, and all these moments of where you think, oh, I'm doing really well, and then all of a sudden you hear someone's done something better than you did, or whatever. And I think that these are these moments of these lessons that we want to learn from Elijah. Yes, we want to learn those great moments of where he just stood up for righteousness in the midst of so much evil, and we can learn of those powerful moments in Elijah's life. But how did Elijah get in this cave? How did he get so depressed? And I think those are in there just as well.
Yeah, I think it shows just how dependent we need to be every moment, because we can change in a moment. Our souls are prone to wander. So it's like people sometimes, I think that's an easy thing to forget, is like, oh, I had my quiet time, quote unquote, this morning. And it's like, okay, well, that was this morning. What did you face, by 10 a.m. or what like what happened at 2? And it's that relationship where it's like, it's the continual, and I don't know if Elijah did that or not, but I think that shows just how quickly, we see that with the Israelites, all throughout the Bible, but it's like it just is staying close, like keeping our focus, keeping our eyes on the Lord.
And I think Jesus called it abiding in him, and abiding in Christ, because here's what I think is so amazing is in 1 Kings chapter 18, verse 36, Elijah's praying to God. And he's at this moment with Baal and all the people that were worshiping, as we were talking about. He's about to show the big moment. And he prays and he says, God, show them who you are. He says, oh Lord, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Israel. Today, let it be known. In other words, let all these people, all these Baal worshipers, let it be known that thou art God in Israel, and that I am thy servant, and that I have done all these things at your word. So it's like there's this moment of it is about, I want you to show God that you're God, but then I want you to show him that I'm your servant. Like, I'm on your side. And so there's this sense, there's this little bit of a moment of even talking to God, of saying, I want them to know that you're God, but I also want them to know that I'm your servant. And I've done everything you said. I think there's just a little of a inclination of that there's pride sleeping in.
But it could also be that he's like, let them know I'm yours so they don't kill me. I mean, that could be it.
Well, they would kill him because they did think he was his. That was the whole point, is, he was representing God, and that's why they hated him. But I think that right after that is Jezebel says, I'm going to kill him, because he had killed all these 400 Baal worshipers, which, Jezebel was a Baal worshiper. So then he runs and he gets in this cave, and then now God's like saying, what are you doing here? And I believe that we don't just get in a cave. We don't just fall in a cave. I think there's a pattern. I think there's a path that we have to protect ourselves. We have to be careful about pride, because what happens, I think, when God begins to work in our lives and we see God doing a lot of things, and everybody's like, oh, you're such a great Christian. Would you pray for, me? Because I know God answers your prayers. And if we're not careful, we start listening to other people's opinion of ourselves, then we start getting prideful. And I think pride starts the journey of self-absorption. I think it begins, we're so self-absorbed. And I think we see that now at that low moment in Elijah. Now, we know that Elijah, goes and continues to be obedient to what God has asked him to do. But I think we have to take note here. We can always just look at all the great and mighty things that God did through Elijah, but we also want to look and learn from those moments where Elijah's in a cave.
I think one of the things, maybe the thing, is where your focus is. Like, are you focusing on yourself? And it kind of goes back to that verse you just read, where he's like, Elijah says, God, show them that you're God, but then also show them that I'm your servant. His eyes were starting to get on himself and not on the Lord. And then when Jezebel threatens him, if his eyes are on himself, he's thinking, I can't go up against Jezebel. Jezebel's going to kill me. I think that's one of the things that when we slowly get into a cave, where it's like we're focusing on, whether it's like a woe is me, like, oh, all this stuff keeps happening to me, all these bad things, or maybe all these good things. I don't know. Like I think when we start focusing on ourselves, like whether that's good or bad or our circumstances, I think that's one of the ways that pride can get in. I do think we see that with Elijah. That's, he's looking at himself. He's not looking at who God is, what God can do, what God has done, what God said he would do.
Yeah, because when God says, Elijah, what are you doing here? Elijah says to God, he says, I've been zealous for you, Lord, the son of Israel. I have, these
it's
other
all about
people,
I've done this.
And he says, I'm zealous for you, but I'm not like the sons of Israel. They've forsaken your covenant. They've torn down, So he's saying, I'm not like all these other Christians. Like I'm a strong Christian. Like I've been faithful. I've been, obedient.
I've done all the right
stuff.
things. Yeah.
I've been all the right things here. And there's this pride that comes in, I think, at that moment. It was because is whether, have you done all those things, Elijah, or did God do that through you? Did you really stop the rain? Did you really do that? Those kind of things.
Well, I think it's interesting, like comparing it to David last week, where we talked a little bit about lament, but also like with repentance, where Elijah, when God, like have these honest moments with the Lord. Like if that's where he's at, tell God. If that's where you're at, tell God. But we don't see Elijah come back around and say, but I know who you are, God. But I know that you are the God who has saved me all these other times. I know that you're the God who destroyed all the Baal.
Yeah.
Like you've proven who you are. Like we don't see that where he's coming back to the Lord, where I think that's also where we see God's grace because God doesn't say, well, then forget you. He says, okay, well, let me show you. If you're not going to acknowledge who I am, let me show you who I am.
And we know that Elijah's getting really on his self-pity because he's like, look what all I've done. And then we see this. And then he says, I'm the only one left. I'm the only Christian. I am the only Christian that's living a godly life. I'm the only Christian that, really trusts God. I'm the only, so now.
And they want to kill me because of it.
Yeah. I'm just, being persecuted because I'm, being faithful. And we see that self-pity. We see that, God, I'm the only one left. And he's like, no, you're not. No, Elijah, get over yourself. And I think you talk about grace and patience and love. God says, come out of the cave and I'm going to talk to you,
Well, I'm going to show you let me show you who I am.
Yeah.
I think what's really interesting about this whole moment with Elijah, where for those who have maybe not read it, the whole picture is God says, come out of the cave. I'm going to pass by. Like basically, I'm going to show you who I am. I'm going to speak to you. And, there was a fire, there was an earthquake, but there was a low whisper there. And that's where God was in the whisper. He wasn't in the big fire. He wasn't in that. And so that's like one thing that is talked about a lot is how God is in the whisper. He's not always, he's not in these not always in these big moments, but.
Yeah, I do want to speak into that because I think what you brought up is a really good point. And it's a little bit different than what we yet, but. Well, I know. But no, before you get to your point, but I think we as believers sometimes think God is not talking to us in everyday circumstances. We're waiting on a miracle. We're waiting on the cancer,
the big thing,
to be, no longer have cancer. We're waiting on God to turn around our finances. Oh, we got this job. Oh, we just met somebody. This, Mr. Wonderful. Oh, this was all God. All these kind of things. We're looking for miracles, and God's like, no, I'm not. I'm in right now with you, Elijah. I've done all those miracles.
Boy, it's like he's in both. Yeah.
I've done those things. I was in where it didn't rain and you said it wouldn't rain and I stopped the rain. I did it, I was there. I came down and I brought the fire, showed all the Baal worshipers I'm true God. But I'm also in this cave. I'm also with you, Elijah. And you and I talk so often about just staying in the room. And I think that we don't want to miss this because this is a low moment for Elijah. He's feeling sorry for himself and he's all up into himself.
Well, he's depressed and he's scared and
that's what depression does when you're all about yourself.
Yeah.
But it's this moment, but God's there too. And I think that's huge. It's like, God, enter in these low moments with me. Enter into these, I'm in the cave and I know, God, you're going to tell me to come out because we're going to, you're not finished with me yet. But God's in the cave. God's like, what are you doing here, Elijah? And I think one of those real sweet moments there is it says he wasn't in the earthquake, he wasn't in the fire, all that. He'd already done that. He's like, I need you to know, Elijah, that you're in this cave and I came to you in the cave. And I think that's huge because that speaks a lot to me. I need to know that the same God that I see so often do miracle after miracle, just in different things. But I need to know that same God will meet me in those moments in the dark cave. And even though Elijah didn't deserve it, he was all thinking about himself. I'm the only one left.
Well, none of us deserve it.
No.
Yeah.
Grace. But you see what I'm saying?
Yeah. Well, it kind of goes in line with that. But the thing that I find so interesting, I don't know, that lack of a better word, interesting about this whole moment too is, God says, why are you here? What are you doing here? Elijah's feeling sorry for himself. God says, go out, let me, stand on the mountain before the Lord. And all these things happen, the fire, the earthquake, the whisper. And then it says in verse 13, and when Elijah heard it, he wrapped his face in his cloak and went out and stood at the entrance of the cave. So he didn't even, when God said, go out and let me show you, Elijah didn't even go out. That's how low he was. I don't think his heart was in a place of rebellion. I'm not going to go out. I think that just shows how low he was. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. I think I think his heart posture wasn't, I don't know his heart, but from what we see, I think because it just doesn't seem like it was out of rebellion, but I just think it's he just was so low that he didn't even go out of the cave until he heard the whisper. So, and I think that's such an interesting moment because I always, And I don't know when I saw that, like at what point, but there was one point in our yearly Bible reading when I noticed, like, wait a minute. Because I always imagine he went out and then the fire and the earthquake and the whisper. Yeah, but he didn't. It was after the whisper. And I think that is, I don't know, there's something about that moment that I think is really powerful too. And just the humanness of Elijah, but then also the grace of God. Like, God didn't stand there like with his arms crossed, like, okay, I'm not going to do anything until, and sometimes, I mean, yes, like God waits for us too, but I think God knew Elijah was so low and he needed to hear God's voice. And so he was like, okay, well, you didn't go out yet, but I'm going to do this. And you're going to come out when you do hear my voice in the whisper. And he does.
Yeah. And I think it's so interesting that God says it again. Like, what are you doing here? Again, like, get out of the cave. And he said, says the same thing. I've been zealous for you. And I just think that, one of those things is that God knew what was going on in Elijah's heart. God knew why he was in the cave. He knew he was not in the cave. He was asking the question, what are you doing here? It's just like, with Adam and Eve, who told you that. Like, we have to sometimes get to that place.
Or why are you hiding? Yeah.
Right. We have to figure out, why am I in this cave? Why am I here? What brought me here? Is it God's not doing what I told him to do, or, things aren't working out the way I want to, or why am I down and depressed? Because I really know that God's this great God. And I really know down deep in my heart that God can do all things. I've seen him work miracle after miracle. And sometimes you have to just get honest with God. And, and God is pulling this out of Elijah. Elijah's not offering that. God's had to ask him twice.
I think that shows the relationship too, because like God, he leans into us. Like we sometimes think like he's just waiting for us. He's like that New Testament verse, like he's at the door knocking. But I don't know if this is like right, but I read Elijah's two responses to God's question of what are you doing here? I read them differently.
You do?
And again, I don't know if this is right or not, so I'm no theologian, but when God asks them, we can't know because it's words on a page. But I read the first question, Elijah's response is Elijah being like the self-pity, like, oh, I've done all these things. I'm the only one left. I'm the only, everyone's trying to take my life. And then the whole, earthquake and fire and whisper moment, he comes out of the cave and then God asks him again, what are you doing here? I read Elijah's response after the cave more like in a vulnerability, like a sadness, like in a true, like this is hard. Like I feel like I'm the only one. I don't know. For some reason, I read it in a different tone. I don't read it as self-pity. I read it as like this moment where he's like, okay, like this is really hard. I feel like I'm the only one left. I feel like they've killed all of the prophets. I feel like I'm the only one left. They want to take my life. I don't know. For some reason, that's how I read it. Again, we don't know if that's true, but I read it with a little bit more softness and maybe not as much self-pity, but maybe a little bit more just vulnerability of, like sometimes you can say something like, oh, I hate everything. Everything's so hard. And then if you were to say that to me, and sometimes I'll, say things like, oh, I hate everything, or, I'm being dramatic, but then you're like, no, but what's really, like, why are you really here? And I'm like, oh, well, everything's really hard. Like you can, it's like just a different tone. Again, I don't know if that's how it's intended, but.
Yeah, I don't know. You're right. I mean, it's like when I said earlier, like it's like a text. A lot of times you read a text and you don't know words on a phone. It can sound harsh, and it could be loving. You put as many emojis as you can, to winky and all that kind of stuff. And we don't have that in Scripture. But I think that with this, I think one of the reasons why maybe you were reading that there's a difference of Elijah coming out of his self-pity, that there's this is the presence of God is there. Because he definitely,
because he does come out of the cave.
And he wraps his face. He knows, oh gosh, I am not God here. And God is present, is here. And I do think
like he probably remembers a little bit of like, oh, okay, I remember who you are. Like I remember the God that I have known you to be. And I think too, like God,
and it's not about me, it's about you.
Yeah. Cause he does, right after this, he does say like, who his predecessor is with Elisha, and I don't know if that's him saying like, you're done, but it doesn't seem like that to me. To me, it seems more of like, I don't know. Like, I don't read it as like, I'm done with you.
Right. Or I'm going to replace you because you've been in the cave.
Right.
I think it was more like saying,
you're not done yet.
Well, that too. But I also hope, like, this is not going to always be so hard. Like, you're about to finish your race. You're about to get through this.
When you're about to lead this other, because he trained Elisha. I mean, Elisha had to, like, kind of like you have another. So I think that's why I read it in that way, like you're saying, is like, I feel like if his heart was that hard, I mean, this is just, I'm going based off of the little bit I know of God. I think if his heart was that hard, God would have been like, okay, then he would have been like, I'm going to replace you then, like we saw with Saul and David.
Yeah.
But God doesn't do that. So that's why I feel like there had to have been this moment of, just this like, this is really hard, God. Like I came out of the cave, his clothes, and it's over his face. He's all the things.
Yeah. And I do think this is a moment in time. I think where it would be hard, and with Saul was the same, he was jealous.
Yeah, it was very
all
different
about him. And it was a long term. It was like, it wasn't this
over and
moment
over
of time.
and over.
It was over and over again. And
Elijah's having a moment. It wasn't like his lifestyle. It wasn't his,
right.
Which is awesome. Yeah, it's like very different situations when it's the posture of your heart versus like, having a hard.
Yeah. But I do think we need to learn from it. Like, we can get in caves. We can. And I think I used to say this all the time to you and the kids, your brothers and sister, but a person wrapped up in itself makes a small package. And I think we need to step back sometimes and think we're focusing on our abilities, what we can and cannot do, what we have, what we haven't had, and not in the power of God, not in what God has done. I think remembrance, we've talked about this a million times, about the power of remembering what God has done. And I think that's, there's a difference in God reminding Elijah what God can do, and Elijah reminding God what Elijah's done. And I think that's, there's a difference there. And I think that will put you in a cave. And I think it's very scary when you get in a cave, because you feel alone, you feel isolated, you feel like God's not there, he's not for you, no matter what. You start beginning to look around in a cave and go, yep, it's dark in here. Yep, I'm alone. And then you start believing that. Yeah.
So we read this story and we can read so clearly that there's an earthquake, there's a fire, and there's a whisper, and Elijah comes out. But in our own lives, sometimes those whispers are more difficult to hear. So if we do feel like we are in a cave, or if we know we're in a cave, or if we don't know if we're in a cave, how do we hear the whisper? How do we get out?
You know what I think? I think we have to get alone and quiet before God. I don't think Elijah would have heard God speak a whisper if we're constantly looking for a hurricane and a fire. And, you're constantly waiting on God to come up and show off and prove to the whole world that he's God and you're his favorite, or you're looking for a miracle for God to do something.
Well, not just alone. I think the stillness, as someone who lives alone, I'm alone a lot, but I can fill up the noise in my head with some social media, some Netflix, some Olympics,
a lot of lies,
a lot of things. Well, not just lies, but just distractions. I mean, you can, but I think what you're saying is like with the alone is the stillness. It's like it's the quiet, like quieting. Yeah. Like quieting your mind and your heart and all the distractions. Yeah.
And here's the key. Jesus said, I will never leave you or forsake you. And that's either true or if it's a lie. And it's true. And I think that if we feel alone, we know that's not true. And so why live off that lie? That's what I'm saying about lies. We hear all these voices. God's forsaken me. God doesn't care. God wants to punish me. God is not answering my prayers like he's answering everybody else. That is all about us. And I think that's what gets us into a cave. But when you turn your prayer around and saying, Lord, just stop at, Lord, you're the God, you're the one true God of Israel. You're their Father. You led them out of the wilderness. You've protected them. You've fed them. You've guided them. You are the one true God. And I'm here to tell everybody you're one true God in this evil world. Just don't put in, but I'm the only one left. Poor me.
Yeah.
look what, life's not going the way it is.
Yeah.
You're not, and I think that's the key. I think it is to get alone and humble yourself before God and say, God, I'm here. I'm listening.
You're not saying, don't tell God. If that's how you're feeling, tell God, but don't just leave it there. Remember who he is. Like if you are feeling like, if there's if someone's threatening your life, it's okay to have an emotion about that and I know you are saying this. I'm just clarifying this is what you're saying.
I am because I said this. God said twice, Elijah, what are you doing here?
Yeah. No, I know. I'm just clarifying of like, it's being honest, but but you have to remember who he is. I want to mention this practice that I have been doing. I haven't even told you this.
Yeah.
But one of our favorite books, you and I favorite books right now is Praying Like Monks, Living Like Fools by, is it Tyler
Staton.
Staton. Anyway, love it. I think you've read it. I'm still tracking through it. But anyway, it's probably our number one book we would recommend just in general, besides the Bible. So anyway, but there is a practice is what it would be called. I don't remember what chapter, but basically where you get silent and you set an alarm on your phone or whatever so that you're not tempted to look, like open your eyes. And I've started doing this and it really is powerful, but you close your eyes and you just sit with your hands open, like palms up, and you just sit and you just say, and this is what I do, and he says this in the book of just like praying a simple prayer at the very beginning of the time, just saying, Lord, here I am. And then you just sit there start at 2 minutes. I set my time for 2 minutes. And then he says like doing that for a month and then moving up to like 3 and 4 or 5 and then up until you get to, 10 minutes or whatever. I'm still like in the 3-minute mark, but because I just started this, but it really is powerful because I don't know. And it's just like this. I mean, I don't know if you want to call it meditation or it's not really that. It's just like this.
And being quiet and being still.
Yeah.
Waiting for a whisper.
I would say that is, and it's not asking God anything. And he says later, like, that's how he started. And then in like the following chapters, he talks about how, incorporating other things after that. But sometimes I'll just do that for 2 minutes and then I might, pray another time, or sometimes I'll continue prayer after that. But it's just having 2 minutes a day where just doing that, setting my phone, and then just kind of like, I don't ask anything. I don't really say anything other than just, Lord, here I am, or God, speak to me, or God, is there anything?
I'm listening.
Yeah. Like I'm listening, or and it's not even trying to hear anything. I think that's the thing too, is maybe because I've done this a lot of days the last month or so, and I don't even feel like God's really said anything during that time, but I don't think that's the point. It's like the point is just the presence, like just being the presence of God. And it's really crazy because I feel his presence when I'm in that time. And it really is powerful. So anyway, I do want to say that as something to practice, but.
Oh yeah, it's wonderful. And as we, close today about just talking about the lessons we can learn about the story of Elijah and how did he get in this cave. And even though he's seen God do, we are capable of that. And we all, can find ourselves in the cave. And I just think there's so many things about this particular one moment of, that. And I do feel the whisper, the being quiet before God and what you're saying, because it is an awareness of humbling ourselves. I think, and in this book, I think it also says that you were talking about is that prayer is a way of humbling ourselves because we're aware of that we need, we need God.
Help.
And I think, but even like you said, even if you don't even say anything, it's just awareness of God, you are the one and true God. Yeah.
Yeah. I try to do it every day, but I'm not very good at doing it every day. He recommends doing it at the same time every day. I haven't quite gotten there. I'm still in the baby stages of it. But when the times I have done it, it is really powerful of just like, I'll just say, Lord, here I am. And then just sit there, close my eyes, have my timer so you don't have to check it. And then just enjoying the presence of God. And it's amazing how you'll feel his presence, you'll feel his peace. And you also will take your eyes off of yourself.
Yeah. I love that.
Thanks for listening. I'm so glad that you could be a part of our conversation. To continue the conversation, you can find Dot on social media at .bowen or visit her website, .bowen.com. Subscribe, like, and share with your friends, and we will see you next week on Write This Down with Bowen.